I want to begin a new sermon series, and it's going to go more than like 5. We're going to start working our way through the Gospel of John. As the elders direct me, we may interrupt this series because it will take us at least 2023 to get finished with this. I suspect that if interruptions do come, we may have a new president or the same president again, whatever, but we may be through that before we get through with this. I'm okay with that, though. I hope you are, because whoever ends up being president, Jesus is going to be king. And focusing on this man, the way that we're going to do for the next year at least, is worth doing. Because he's the most amazing man. Although I'll tell you that the way that John tells the story, not necessarily the most comfortable of stories. At least it's not for me. There's a part of me that loves this story and wants to listen to it. And I hope that's the lion's share of me, but I will admit that when I read the story, I encounter myself as well. And I encounter myself in the fights that Jesus has, because he has to have those with me. And this Jesus that we see in the Gospel of John, he's presented very differently than the other 3 guys who got to write Gospels presented him. Those 3 are called the synoptics because they all see together. Optics, that seeing, and sen meaning together. So those 3 guys, Matthew, Mark, and whatever the other guy, those, it's Luke, I know. I'm not that tired. Those 3 guys, they all present Jesus very similarly, and they very much focus upon his ministry. What was the ministry of the Messiah? John's going to come and give us a different kind of picture, a more intimate picture. Who was the person of the Messiah? This guy writing for us is probably Jesus' best friend. Do you know he had one of those? He could call himself the disciple whom Jesus loved, while other people were still alive. Who would go, wait a minute? If they didn't have a really unique relationship, other people would have gone, wait a minute, he loved me too. But for whatever reason, this man and the Lord, they had a closer friendship, a close bond. And so John is qualified to tell us who this guy is and to show us these pictures of him and his person, his personality, and how that personality is so strange, so different from us, we broken creatures who have fallen from grace. You ever heard those words before, fallen from grace? It's a big theological idea. It's the idea that sin is all over me and messing with me and causing me trouble in my life. And to fall from grace is to enter into that state where I'm not who I ought to be. All right? What does it mean to fall from grace? Well, I don't know that means that God gets hostile to me. It means that my nature leaves his. God is a gracious God. And so to fall from grace is to take on a nature that I was never designed to have. That's not who I'm supposed to be. And in this gospel, I see fallen creatures that are non-gracious, that aren't generous and loving and open, creatures that have the same struggle I have. And this man comes into contact with them to call them out of that. The thing is, we don't necessarily want to leave our nature. We want to be saved. We want to go to heaven when we die. I don't want to enter into eternal torment. The truth is, though, to live as a creature without grace, that is torment. To live as a person who is filled with brokenness and ugliness, especially the kind of private brokenness and ugliness that so many of us hide, that's hard. That's a suffering. That's sorrow. That's the nature of hell. It is for this reason that Jesus came, to pull us out of our broken nature and restore to us our gracious nature. But what we see in the gospel is so much argument in the Gospel of John. But we also see so much beauty. And so I get to see my nature if I stay away from him, and I get to see my nature if I'm called back to him. This is what the good news is. This man came that I could change, that I could leave behind evil and become something else, become what I was always meant to be. He has come to call us back home. And it's at that point, those points, where he comes and seems to argue with me the most that I most desperately need him. In order to prepare us for that message, the Gospel of John opens up with this poem kind of thing. It's a really dense theological poem. By really dense, I mean really dense. So I hope you're well rested. We're going to be here a while. I hope you brought your lunch. I hope I'm kidding. But this is, I could probably talk about just these 18 verses for 2023. They're that dense. I won't do that all this morning, but there are at least 23 claims made at the opening statements of this gospel that set us up for how to read it, to let us know who this book is about and what it is he's trying to do with us. In these opening statements, we see the beauty of this man, and in these opening statements, we get a glimpse of the truth that's going to come into conflict with us, that we're going to have to make some real decisions about who we want to be. And it's going to come with even some warning. Hang on to your ungracious nature at your peril. Continue to be the broken person. You'll have to fight with him to do it, but you can. And you don't want to do that because of what you could miss, because it's so good. If it's all right, we'll just work our way through this. And we'll take it a claim at a time. The first claims are kind of the densest ones, so don't measure the length of the sermon by the first couple of verses, because it speeds up as we go, I promise, okay? So, he says, in the beginning was the Word. There are at least two claims there. In the beginning, any Jew hearing that, what do they think of? Genesis, right, creation. So John begins this story letting us know that this is not a small story about a prophet. This is a cosmic story about all of creation. That it's a very, very big story. And that the sky is going to come into our world from the vastness of the very beginning of time. Because he predates the beginning of time. It says, in the beginning was the Word. And the Greek word for word, I don't want to overbore you with too many Greek words. In fact, this is the only time I'll do this. But the Greek word for word is logos. You've probably heard that before, right? Logos can be fairly translated as word. And it can mean something as simple as that. And what is a word? Well, word is a sound that we make that carries a concept. Words are amazing things if you think about them for a moment. I make a sound with this part of my body, and it goes out into the air, and it hits you in this part of your body, and then a thought that was in here shows up in there. I say white elephant, and what's in your head right now? And if you're fighting with me, okay, white elephant, well done, yeah. I mean, if you're fighting with me, you might think, boo, alligator, shut up, But if you actually allow the word to do what words do, it transfers thought from one mind to another. But the word logos is even bigger than that. The word logos is a word that the Greeks would use to mean something like reasoning. It is the capacity to use words that makes you different from all other creatures. Because you can use words, you can have abstract thought. You can pick up things like green grass and then separate green and just consider it as... You realize you've never seen green. You've seen objects that are green. But the only place you've encountered green as green is inside your brain when you abstracted it from all those green objects that you've ever encountered. That kind of behavior is what is captured by the word logos. It's so much more than word. It's the capacity to use words. It is the capacity to reason. It is not philosophy. That would be philosophia, the love of wisdom. But it is philosophy's cousin or even sibling. Because you can't really do philosophy without logos. You have to be able to think and reasoning. And it says, in the very beginning was this reasoning capacity. Before anything started, there was reasoning. Okay? In the beginning was the Logos. And the Logos was with God. Okay, so we're talking about two different individuals now. We're talking about this reasoning capacity, and we're talking about God. Okay, good. And the Logos was God. Okay, John. That's two separate claims, and logostically, logically, they're very hard to harmonize, aren't they? How do I put together the idea that the capacity to reason was with God and the capacity to reason was God? One of the logical tenets is a thing can't be two things at once, in the same time, in the same way, in the same place. Logic says, no, things are what they are, and you can't double up like that, and you can't unless you're dealing with God. And suddenly what the Gospel of John opens up by doing is saying that God is a whole lot different than what we thought. I know that because I met this guy. I became really good friends with this guy. And I realized that this guy prayed, and he talked to God, and he interacted with God. But the longer I knew him, the more that I came to realize that I was dealing with God. And that so inside of this single entity, this single nature, this single being that is God, there is God, and then there is that reasoning capacity. And that reasoning capacity is also God. I have these two. And they would learn later that there's actually a third. He begins with this amazing idea. Why does he start the gospel this way? Can we not just meet Jesus or hear about the wise men and the birth and stuff like that? He's doing this because he's saying, okay, I'm going to tell you a story about a guy, but you need to understand this guy, well, if I really want to tell you who he is, then I got to start here. That there was this reasoning capacity that designed creation, and that the reasoning capacity, that was with God. And also, God was that, and those two were together. And that if you're going to understand who this guy is, you're going to have to understand he's going to break things for you. He's going to make things he's going to put thoughts in front of you that are so hard to think. But those thoughts are so important because they're going to show you who God is. And if you're going to love him, you're going to have to dig deep into things like this. If you're going to know him, well, you don't want to think that way, especially not if you're Jewish. He's going to say, but you're gonna. When you meet him, trust me. Now notice he starts out with word, when the beginning was the word. And then the very next verse, it says, in him. So apparently, this reasoning capacity was not just a capacity, it was a person. That the ability to think and reason and use language that is in God had its own personhood. It's amazing. It's amazing. In him was life. It's another claim. This reasoning capacity of God, to reason together with God, is how we come to life. Okay? As long as we are using our God-reflecting reasoning capacities for our own selves and our own selfish ways, we are not truly alive. It is only when we think together with God that we come to life. It is only when we accept the truths that God reveals that we come to life. This is where life is to be found. And that life was the light of men. As long as we don't accept the reasoning of God and do our own reasoning for ourselves, we remain darkened. What does that do? Well, my reasoning says, I want what I want. I'm going to pursue whatever I want. So my hungers and appetites, well, if they leave me into pain, maybe I'll control them. But otherwise, as long as I'm having fun, I'm going to continue doing whatever I want. And I'm going to accept justice on my terms. What I believe is justice, what justice clearly is. And I'm going to do what I want there, and I'm going to do it. That kind of thinking leads us into death and disaster and darkness. But when he comes to us, he enlightens us. He shows us what it really means to be human. What it really means to be human is to protect myself and make sure that I'm safe and protect me and mine against the enemy out there. No, what it really means to be human is to be gracious. To be loaded with loving hospitality and kindness to everyone. Well, what about them? Yes, even them. That's what it is to be enlightened by this man, who comes willing to have hard conversations, even rough conversations with the broken, but comes to give light. And that light shines in the darkness, and the darkness is not overcome. Do you see how big and cosmic all of this is? The forces of evil are arrayed against God, and God is there, but the light keeps shining, and this light is going to come into your life. Now, he goes from this big cosmic conversation, and he shifts gears, and he does this twice in this little poem. He goes from this big, all these ideas, and then he shifts to this guy. It's very unexpected. It sounds like we're talking about big ideas, and then he says, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. Now, in a way, that's kind of a relief, isn't it? Because those big ideas, they kind of hurt. How often do we think at the level and the depth that those first few verses require of us? It's hard to do that. I don't want to do that. That's tough. It's nice to suddenly shift and go, okay, there was a guy. Okay, good. Now we're talking about stuff I can at least understand. You're down to the level of story. Good. So there was a man who was sent from God. His name was John. Good. A particular specific man. Good. I can get my head around that. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. Okay, well, that light stuff, we're heading back to the cosmic, but at least, okay, I can understand. He comes, he's preaching, he's talking about the light. He's telling them, pay attention to that. Okay, good. He was not the light, but he came to bear witness about the light. Why does John do this? He wants to take these cosmic ideas already and tie it to the story that he's about to begin telling. That's why he shifted gears like that. One of the things about our religion, our faith, is that it is not just based on ideas. If you go to most religions are absolutely based on ideas. This is what God is like. This is what the world is like. This is what it's like to have a good life. And this is how you arrange things. That's what most religions are built on. Judaism and Christianity are historical religions, meaning God intervened in history. God came and told a story. In Judaism, the big story is the Exodus. And in Christianity, the big story is the one who is the Exodus. The one who comes to set us free, to liberate the captives. The one who is God himself, the God of the Exodus come among us. And so these big, huge ideas are going to be met, not just in ideas. Let me talk to you about the Trinity. Okay, that's hard. Does anybody really understand Trinity? If so, I would love to have lunch with you today. And I would love for you to help me, because Trinity's hard. But it's not going to be just those ideas, because what we're really going to meet is a guy, a person. And we're going to get to fall in love with Trinity by falling in love with this man. Well, he ties it to that specific story. This light out there, it came with this, and this guy came first, and he comes and he gets people ready, and they didn't even know what they were going to encounter. They had no idea what was coming, but it was going to be the light. And what is that light coming to do? It's the most amazing stuff. Because I feel the darkness, don't you? I feel this mess in me. I don't like reflecting on a day and going, there were things in that day that shouldn't have been there. There are things that I did that I wish I could go back in time and take them away. I don't like that. I don't like the darkness. Listen to this. The true light, which gives light to everyone, gives light to some people? No, it gives light to me, to everyone, was coming into the world. That's why this story begins with this guy. It's because he's going to point to something, again, back to cosmic. The light that gives light to everybody. This light that comes to give me the life that's inside of him so I can come back to his gracious nature. That's what he's coming to do. He's coming to save the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. Wasn't able to recognize the Creator when it came. But to all who did receive him, he came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. I told you there would be conflict in this story. And this story is this idea that Jesus is coming, and who is he coming to? To a people well prepared, a people who have a history of thousands of years of interacting with the very God that he is. All right? A people who really ought to have been able to recognize him. But when he comes to them, they aren't able to do what he says because he's saying things that they don't want. It's a good thing I'm not in any danger like that. I'm, after all, not a man who has grown up as assuming an identity as one of the people of God. I grew up coming to church. I have a history that goes back all the way to Abraham. A history that I own as my own. My goodness, I am that which was his own. We often like to think of that as these other people, and they had that problem. Why then is it in the very beginning of the book? He is warning me, especially me who grew up. I started coming to church before, what was I, 18 days old maybe? From very earliest childhood. I started in that which was his own category. Well, I've got to then accept the truth that he may come and confront things in me that I don't want confronted. He might come and confront my political life. He might come and confront my hungers and my attitudes. He might come and confront my very identity, the things that say, this is who I am. And if I don't accept his confrontation, I could lose something amazing. When he comes to tell me this is who I need to be, I have to listen. And there are going to be times when he says things that are very uncomfortable. Things like, well, you got to eat my flesh. I don't want to hear that. Got to listen. Why? Because those who receive it, but to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. This is what he's coming to do. To bring us back to our true identity. Because that's what you were born to be. You were born to be a gracious person, a person that looked like God, who was raised by God, who loved like God, who did the same dance as what's in the Trinity with everybody else. That's what you're supposed to be. Generous, kind, loving. You're supposed to be gracious and forgiving. You're supposed to be just like him. Well, that's what he came to accomplish. To make us the true children of God. And not because of our effort. He says, who are born not of blood, nor the will of the flesh, nor the will of a man. It's not like you earned your way into this. It's the act of God, born of God. It's an amazing mission. And the amazing thing is anyone wouldn't want it. But at some level, none of us do. There are things within all of us that are not yet aligned with God. And this word, this reasoning comes to reason with us to overcome those things so that we might become like God. We might become his true children who reason and think the way that God thinks, love the way that God loves. This is what he came to accomplish. And how did he do it? This great cosmic being who was the God of heaven, who was with God at the very beginning and created all things. They were all made through him. Nothing was made that has been made without him. All that person, the reasoning, the logos, became flesh and dwelt among us. and we have seen his glory. Glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. This big idea that I started out with, this huge concept of the reasoning capacities of God, who's so amazing that he becomes a person, and he's with God and is God, that person, he takes on flesh and becomes a dude, a guy like you and me, who sweats and smells bad, and walks around and talks and laughs, and tells jokes, and plays games, and loves really well. He became flesh. And what was he like? He was a gracious man. He was a man like he ought to have been, like I ought to have been, and wish that I always was, but haven't been, but can be if I look at him. As I set my eyes on this man and I see the blessings that he bestows and I see the arguments in which he engages, I have to let my heart, let him have those arguments with me. And I let him pour out those blessings on me so that I can build friendship with him, because what am I looking at when I look at him? I'm looking at God. I'm learning the nature of the Father. And I'm learning what I was always supposed to be like, because I was made to bear his image, to be like God. So this one comes and says, okay, I want to show you what he's like. And then just to make sure you haven't missed the idea that, by the way, this is going to be a specific story. This is not just a set of ideas. He switches back my Bible even puts it in parentheses. He switches back to that story again. John bore witness about him and cried out, "This is he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me because he was before me." Again, we're into weird, mysterious stuff, but I guess it's not terribly surprising with John. He was a weird guy. But what does he mean by he was before me? Well, it doesn't mean he was born before me, because he's 6 months younger. It doesn't just mean greater, although he is greater. He was before because he is God. This is God that we're encountering. And what does this one do to us when we come into contact with him? If we will lower our hostilities and let him touch us, if we will put our trust in this one's name, what does he do? For from his fullness we have received grace upon grace. We become gracious people again. I mean, we receive grace that forgives our sins. We receive grace that overcomes hell and sets us free. But it's not just that. He is full of what I need. He is full of what is, if I am not with him, it is absent in me. I am selfish without him. I am self-protective without him. I am hostile to others who might threaten me without him. But from his fullness, I receive grace upon grace. I can become gracious because he is. And it's what he's full of, and it's what he's pouring into me. He reestablishes what I lost. He rebuilds what I broke. And it all comes from the fullness of this one who has come to save us. Isn't this great? How do I get there? Through a whole bunch of obedience? No. He says, for the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth come through Jesus Christ. I don't obey so that I can become gracious. I obey because he is inspiring grace within me. I obey because he's rebuilding me. If I try to fix myself, where's that end? Anybody try that? Misery. You either become miserable or you make everyone around you miserable. That effort to obey on your own steam, trying to use sinful tools to accomplish holy ends, is just damned. And I'm not cursing. But Wow. Thank you, Siri. I guess we needed a little levity for a moment. It is from the work of Christ within me that I even want to obey. I come by his reasoning to believe truth and to desire a life aligned with truth. And I come by his work within me to want to be gracious. And a gracious human being is one that keeps the law anyway. And you look at that law and it's trying to design in you a gracious person. And the whole law of Moses is God saying, you don't do these things because I would never do those things. So you don't do them either. And if you're with me, you won't. But what comes with Jesus is this truth that I'm going to give you the graciousness back. And when I do that, then you will want to obey. Walk with me and keep my commandments. And it will work within you to make you a beautiful person. I will lead you into the real truth of who you were always meant to be and recreate in you grace, and you'll get it all, Jesus would say, from me. Because it's out of his fullness that we find our way here. He says, no one has ever seen God. Well, that's true. I have so much trouble when I start. The idea of God is the biggest idea in human philosophy. It really is. It's massive. And when you start thinking about, well, what is this person like? And you enter into the infinities, for instance, all of his infinite capacities. My goodness. It's brain-breaking. No one has ever seen a thing like that. But the only God, who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. That's what this story is going to be about. The God who is at the Father's side, who became flesh and dwelt among us, who gave us the power to become the children of God, who gave us back our birthright to be gracious persons. This is what this story is about. And this is the story of our salvation. It is the story of my conflict in my ungraciousness, my lack of desire to be a gracious person, being overcome by the gracious God who came to save me, who came to rescue me and make me what I was meant to be, who came to save my soul and remake my soul and make me whole and good and beautiful. And this is a good story. For the next year, this is what we're going to be looking at. Most of it's not quite so heady as this. Mostly it's these beautiful stories about this dude having fights with people that don't want to be good. But it is this beautiful, good story of a good man. And it's worth spending a year or even two looking at, isn't it? Because when we look at it, we see the glory of God. And we are called back to the glory of God. It is the story that recreates our hearts. It is the man who renews our nature and makes us what we were always meant to be. Is there anything that you have that's better than that? This year, we're going to walk our way through it. We've already begun. And as you spend time thinking about who it is that came to rescue you, and as you spend time thinking about what he rescued you from, you may have been looking at your own ungraciousness, the pockets of ungracious trouble that still exist within the life of the saints. And if you look inside yourself and you're like, I got a problem that needs to be fixed, he can fix it. And if you need the care of the church to help with that, we want to give it. If you need our prayers, let us do it. If you haven't started following this guy yet, he's the most amazing man. Come back and hear about him some more, because he's just a stunningly wonderful person. And he's worth giving your life to. It may be that you came here today carrying a burden that was really heavy on you last year, and you don't want to carry it into the new year. And if that's you, let us pray for you. If this morning you're subject to the invitation of God, won't you come right now while we stand and sing?